Chapters 6 and 7, Sexual Behavior and Sexual Relationships. These two chapters have been combined into just one lecture. Now, sex can include any behavior that accompanies physiological arousal. And in this lecture, it's important to identify that sexual behavior could be accompanied by many different types of activities, and different individuals may exhibit different types of sexual behavior. Sexual behavior may include other people, or it may not include other people. Now, here we have a list of over 2,000 individuals. With a subjective scale throughout the day, individuals were ranking a subjective measurement of happiness. And really the circumference of these circles is indicative of how much time they spend. So individuals resting and sleeping, working occupies most individuals' day, home on their computer, computing, traveling, grooming, taking care of themselves, housework, television, and you take a look at the subjective scale of 1 to 100, and by far the happiest individuals had marked themselves was when they were engaged in some type of sexual encounter, making love. So sex with a partner makes people happy during the act, and it also boosts their ongoing level of happiness. So let's talk about different types of sexual behaviors. Now, oral sex is more common amongst younger couples, and often men report enjoying oral sex more than women do. The correct term to describe oral sex for women is cunnilingus. This is oral stimulation of the vulva. And some women especially like cunnilingus because the tongue provides a softer, gentler, lubricated, tactile stimulation over coarse fingers. Fellatio is oral stimulation of the penis. There's also analingus. This is oral stimulation of the anus. Now, why would individuals engage in such behavior? Well, with analingus, oral stimulation of the anus is sometimes practiced because the anus is a primary erogenous zone. Also, this is sometimes used as a prelude prior to anal sex. Other types of sexual behavior include foreplay. This is behavior designed to stimulate sexual arousal. Coitus is the clinical term to describe sexual intercourse between a man and a woman. I need to emphasize that coitus is a penis entering into a vagina. Coitus would not include two homosexual males engaging in sexual intercourse. It is specifically a penis entering into a vagina. Tribadism is the thrusting of two vulvas together. If females got together and they thrusted their vulvas together and rubbed them together, that would constitute as tribadism. Anal sex, which had previously been called sodomy, that's more of an obsolete term, is penetration of the anus with the penis. And there's a number of reasons why individuals may engage in anal sex. This could certainly include homosexual contact, expression of intimacy with homosexuals. For some heterosexuals, this may be done because a woman may be on the menstrual cycle. It could be a form of sexual exploration. And also, during anal sex, the recipient could have their glands stimulated. Afterplay is a term to describe sexual behavior following coitus or orgasm. This could include bonding. This could include any type of activity associated with sexual behavior after an orgasm has occurred. So let's take a look at common types of sexual behavior. So these are common types of sexual behavior performed between men and women in the ages 25 and 29. These are the types of sexual behavior that most individuals between 25 and 29 had experienced within the last 12 months. So we see that this includes masturbation, masturbation with a partner, giving oral sex, receiving oral sex between homosexual couples, coitus, anal sex. So we see that among these, the most common is coitus, masturbation, and then oral sex. So let's talk about masturbation. Now, masturbation is sometimes referred to as eroticism. For many, just saying the term masturbation is a dirty term, or it's a uncomfortable term to say. However, it's common, especially amongst males. So stimulating one's own body is referred to as masturbation, and culture significantly affects one's view on masturbation. For instance, demographic factors like age and education level affect how often people masturbate and how guilty they feel about it. It's also interesting to note that women use more diverse techniques to masturbate than men do. Women, they typically use their fingers to rub on the clitoris during masturbation. It would not be as common for them to use a dildo or something like that, but they may use a vibrator while masturbating. Also, it's interesting to note that gay individuals masturbate more than heterosexual people do. One college student survey had indicated that 88% of men masturbate, whereas 60% of women masturbate more than 2 times a week, 50% of men, and about 16% of women. These graphs, here you see in blue or purple, these represent men in different age groups. And you see in every single age group, this blue or purple bar is higher in frequency than the red or orange bar. In every single instance, males masturbate more than females do. Here's another interesting graph. This shows the level of education correlated with the frequency of masturbation. So if you take a look at this graph to the right, you see that individuals within the last 12 months with different levels of education, those less than a high school education masturbate less frequency than those with a master's degree or some type of college. So the more educated an individual is, the more frequently they engage in masturbation. Now, this was a very interesting statistic, and this was identified initially by Dr. Alfred Kinsey. And this is interesting because it's contrary to what a lot of the American public had thought. Most individuals had initially perceived masturbation as being a selfish or perhaps sinful act, and that if an individual was more educated, they thought they would not partake in something that would be unclean or inappropriate or self-indulgent. However, the evidence indicates the opposite. Maybe it's because individuals with a higher education, they're more comfortable with their body. Maybe they're not as concerned with what were once thought as, primitive or maybe they had associated masturbation as being normal. They didn't associate it with primitive or sinful activity. So why is it so common? Well, there's a number of reasons. Masturbation is often performed because if an individual doesn't have a willing or available participant, well, they don't need one. It's also free. People don't have to take themselves out to dinner before engaging in some type of autoerotic activity. There's no limit. Individuals don't reject themselves. For some, it helps them learn how to have an orgasm. It may help an individual learn how to prevent premature ejaculation. It is a form of safe sex. There is no risk of acquiring STDs. Some people can have stronger orgasms, especially if they know which areas to target on their own body. And physical stimulation while visualizing or thinking of sexual fantasies. Often looking at visual imagery, thinking of sexual fantasies, individuals may engage in autoerotic behavior. So I'm going to talk about this in just a moment. Now, some myths are that masturbation causes acne, blindness, or even hairy palms. This is not the case. So let's talk about some fantasies. Now, both males and females fantasize daily. On average, men fantasize about 7.2 times a day, and on average, females fantasize about 4.5 times a day. So, when individuals engage in fantasies, these are some of the commonly reported fantasies that men engage in and women engage in. Now, this was taken by 160 heterosexual college students, and if you take a look at some of the male-dominated fantasies, they include things like visual imagery, lots of intercourse, little emotion, multiple partners, often taking a male-dominant role, sex with a virgin, 2 or more partners simultaneously, males dominate that, anal intercourse, this one's interesting, making love with the possibility of being discovered. That's like they're engaging in a sexual activity and they're hiding somewhere, maybe in the house, and then somebody breaks in and identifies them and they get caught. They get caught in the act. You take a look at some of the fantasies that are more common amongst females. They include more touching, more caressing, more feelings, more emotional closeness, often a passive role, romance. You see some of the fantasies that women outnumber men, while being forced to submit, being rescued from danger by one who will become lover, touching, kissing sensuously, caressing. So now that we've talked about autoerotic behavior, I've introduced some terms that's used to describe common types of sexual behavior. Let's talk about oral sex, and let's talk about some risks associated with the various types of sexual behavior. Now, for some individuals, especially college students, oral sex is common because it may not constitute as sexual intercourse. And for individuals engaging in oral sex, there is no risk of unwanted pregnancy. Certainly, this doesn't fall into the clinical definition of coitus. However, oral sex is still a type of sex. It's important to note STDs are still transmissible through oral sex, especially STDs like herpes. It is even possible to transmit bacteria like chlamydia through oral sex. Sexual contact may have associated risks with other types of sex as well. Of course, coitus. A drawback of coitus could be an unwanted pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases. With anal sex, associated risks include fissures, these are tears, STDs. Some STDs are transmitted at a higher frequency through anal sex, like HIV. Hemorrhoids, this can also be a consequence of anal sex. And tribadism. STD transmission is possible during the thrusting of 2 vulvas. So regardless of the type of sexual behavior, there are often associated risks involved, maybe with the exception of masturbation. So with coitus, this is penetration of the vagina by the penis, and this can be performed in different positions. The Kama Sutra is an ancient Hindu text, and the Kama Sutra is the oldest known documented text. It's a sex manual. So this documents human sexual behavior, and this includes numerous sex positions. Currently, the missionary position is the most common, and the reason why is MRI studies have indicated that the majority of the contact of the penis entering the back wall of the vagina is achieved through missionary sex. The penis bends and it strikes the vagina, creating more surface area or more contact during this position. Now, the sexual revolution and the women's movement spurred experimentation with other positions. And although missionary is the most common type of sex, about 50 years ago, with the women's movement, there became a lot greater liberty in women taking an active role during sexual activity. So let's take a look at some coitus preferences amongst those individuals polled. These are the individuals' top preferences. So the way that this chart reads is, this is saying males, 25% of males prefer to be on top. 45% of males that have a preference prefer the female to be on top, and then 25% of males prefer the rear entry method. With females, 48% of females prefer the male on top, 33% of females with a preference prefer to be on top, and then 15% of females prefer the rear entry method. So if you take a look at these, you see that, well, the male prefers the female on top and the female prefers the male on top. So it looks like everybody likes the other person to do all the work. However, upon further investigation, you see that the vast majority of sexual preferences include a face-to-face contact. Now that is very important to emphasize because this face-to-face contact occurs in mammals, but this, does not occur in mammals. Typically, most all mammals have a rear entry intercourse method. With the exception of bonobos and humans, most of all mammals engage in sexual intercourse in this fashion. The majority of humans, although they often engage in this fashion, the vast majority engage in some type of face-to-face contact over rear entry. That is because in humans, sex has an important psychological factor. It's often an expression of intimacy. So there are various motivations to engage in sexual behavior for individuals. They include physical attraction and romantic love, desire for status, security, or being liked, a desire to conform. If most individuals in their social group are engaging in sexual behavior, a lot of times people want to conform to what constitutes as normal, or even rebel. Maybe they want to break out of some of the cultural norms that they've been subjected to, and maybe they would like to explore. Sometimes to desire or arouse jealousy, maybe in a former boyfriend or girlfriend. Also a desire to have children. These are all common motivations for sexual relationships. Now, basic demographic facts can predict an individual's attitudes on sexual issues. This could include sex, age, education level, region of residence, race, ethnicity, religion. And for instance, this graph right here shows that more women over men agree that premarital sex is wrong or mostly wrong. So now let's take a look at some factors that affect a college student's willingness to engage in sexual activity. Well, one is the type of relationship. Many college students report that, well, some relationships could be appropriate for sexual activity, whereas others, well, they may be fun to hang out with, but not necessarily hook up or have sex with. Also, the length of relationship. For many, there needs to be a designated period of time to engage in a relationship with somebody before making sexual contact with them. Also, the awareness of one's partner's sexual behavior. Availability of condoms. High libido at the time. Alcohol. And this next one's interesting, an expectation of intercourse. For some, especially in many women, they've noted that they could engage in a relationship and feel satisfied. However, because they thought there was an expectation of sexual intercourse, they chose to engage in sexual activity, where they could have been equally satisfied without engaging in sex. Now, reasons for abstaining from sex. Although sex is a very hot topic and a very charged topic, many individuals have strong opinions about. It's often glamorized. It's important to emphasize that it is possible and certainly it is acceptable to abstain from sexual intercourse. Reasons why individuals may abstain from sex is they may not be comfortable with their partner. Maybe religious reasons, guilt, fear of unwanted pregnancy, STDs, or even a bad reputation. Our society often holds double standards in terms to what is permissible for males and what is permissible for females. Now, males are more likely to engage in casual sex than females. And perhaps a evolutionary root of this is due to women investing more during sexual encounters. If a woman becomes pregnant, she has to carry the child during their process of gestation, and and rear the child after delivery, whereas males, they invest very little into some of their reproductive cells. So perhaps there's an evolutionary basis for this. Now, this takes a look at individuals. Males would be blue and females would be orange. You take a look at proposed activities between males and females are more likely to go and hang out and spend an evening with an individual. However, when proposed activities, when they were changed, would you want to come over to my apartment tonight? Well, females weren't as likely to do so because there's an inference of sexual contact. If an individual, like a male, would go up to a female and ask her, excuse me, do you want to come over my apartment tonight, come over my place tonight? It's inferred that there's sexual activity going to be going on. To be even more direct, 0 females in this study indicated that they would go over an individual's house exclusively for sex without knowing them. So these casual sex interactions or simply hookups, they're much more common in males than they are females. Important considerations: both parties must be willing. An orgasm need not always be the goal. There's no need to rush. Variation in one's sexual response is not uncommon at all. Individuals could vary, and they could vary significantly in the types of human sexual responses that they have, as we've seen in our last lecture. Also, one of the most important aspects is what happens afterwards. This isn't considered, however, it should be considered. Now, sexual activity can escalate. Individuals may be described as having a sexual addiction. When sexual activity begins to escalate, the craving increases. It's persistent and it's compulsive, where individuals, they simply cannot stop. It's often accompanied by guilt. So some common types of sexual addictions, they include constant use of pornography, compulsive masturbation, multiple affairs, unsafe sex, prostitution, multiple unknown sex partners, and even excessive phone or cybersex. And due to the very private nature of sexual activity, there are programs for sex addicts. Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, Codependents of Sex Addicts, and even Survivors of Incest Anonymous. So now that we've discussed sexual behavior and sexual relationships, our next lectures we're going to be taking a look at fertility, infertility, pregnancy, and childbirth.